All right, good morning. How's everybody doing? Everybody doing okay? Hey, just look at somebody and give them a high five. Give them a high five. Just say, man, it's going to be a great morning. Okay, thank you for the three of you who gave somebody a high five. I do want to encourage you, take some notes today. Take some notes. We're going to be talking about something that's really important, and my guess is most of us are not doing a great job with it. All right, we're going to talk about something really important, so I want to encourage you to take some notes. We're going to move quickly. I had a pastor friend tell me something this week, and when I heard it, it was kind of shocking, and actually, like my cynicism kind of went through the roof, and I was like, man, out of all the things that are true, that thing is not true. All right, there's no way that's true. But then I went and fact-checked it, and lo and behold, he's right. Just recently, here in America, they did a big survey. It was a survey. I shouldn't say necessarily particularly a big survey, but they did a survey. And they found that out of Americans, one third of Americans believe the next American Civil War is right around the corner. Isn't that crazy? Look at somebody on your left. Look at the person on your left. Look at the person on your right. Like, out of the three of you, one of you thinks we're about to go into a civil war statistically. That's crazy. Go fact check it. Google it after the sermon. Thank you very much. And rather not, I mean, I think that's kind of extreme. I've got my own doubts of why that would be the case. But I think what a lot of Americans, what a lot of us are sensing is that there's a lot of anger and a lot of hate in the air right now. Right? I mean, I think we can agree with that. I mean, we're a pretty divided people to the point to where one third of them, when asked, says they think the next American Civil War is right around the corner. This morning, I want to submit to you that Jesus has shown us the answer to this. Jesus has given us a better way. Jesus has given us a solution. And I believe as the church, if we would rise up and if we would do this, I think it would solve a lot of our problems. So today we're going to look at two primary principles. And the first principle is this. We're going to jump right into principle number one. We are to love, especially when it's hard to love. We're to love, especially when it's hard to do so. Today, we're going to be focusing our energies on one passage, Luke chapter 6, beginning in verse 27. Luke chapter 6, beginning in verse 27. Feel free to turn there or click there. The words will also be on the screen. Follow along as I read this out loud. And keep in mind, this is Jesus speaking, all right? Jesus is saying these words. But I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. To one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other cheek also. And from one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you. And from one who takes away your goods, let me say that again. From one who steals from you, do not demand them back. And as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. Listen, if you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. Jesus is saying, listen, everybody loves people that loves them. Right? Like he's speaking to people who claim to be the people of God. And to say, Jesus, look, we're doing fine. We love people who love us. And Jesus says, listen, that's not a distinguishing mark of somebody who loves God. Everybody loves people who love them. Jesus continues. Verse 34. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? I mean, if you're giving to somebody who's going to give you back, that's not the mark of someone who believes in God. That's a business transaction. Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great. Your reward will be great. and you will be sons of the Most High. Anybody here, you would just say, like, man, you love deep Bible study? Anybody? Yeah, right? Yeah, we're like that. In church circles, I hear that a lot, right? Like when we love going deep into the Scripture, we love deep Bible Scripture. And that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But this morning, I want to submit to you, this is the deep stuff. This is the advanced stuff. Learning to love your enemies. This is the meat. This is not the easy stuff. This is not the milk, right? This is not for beginners. This is the advanced thing. And the reality is, Christians, non-Christians, many of us, we don't do a great job loving our enemies. Anybody heard this story? Anybody heard the story of two pilots? Actually, before I tell you the story, let me do a before survey and then an after survey. Anybody here, you get nervous flying? Like you're flying commercially, you get nervous about that? Anybody? Okay, yeah, it's all right. I do. I get kind of nervous. All right, let me tell you a story. Have you heard? This is true. Two pilots got into a fist fight while flying a plane at 37,000 feet in the air. Anybody heard this story? You heard this in the news? Okay, now, how many of you are nervous about flying commercially? You know what I'm saying? Like we should all raise our hands. This is crazy. In fact, they took statements, obviously because this is a pretty big incident, saying, "Hey, what happened?" And we actually have the words from the co-pilot. Here's what the co-pilot said. And by the way, the co-pilot's the kind of the one that got beat up. I mean, it's okay, but he got beat up. The conversation with the pilot. This is the co-pilot. He said the conversation with the pilot became heated because the pilot forbade the hostess from bringing me a meal tray. And the reason he was upset is because the co-pilot did not ask the pilot for permission to get a meal tray. All right, so just let me paint this picture. There are two people, 37,000 feet. I think there's 150 people on board. The co-pilot's hungry. He asked for a meal tray. The pilot punches him in the face because he didn't ask for permission to ask for a meal. In fact, the brawl was so bad that even after they thankfully safely landed the plane, they got into another fist fight like on the tarmac. I mean, it's just crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy. We are not people who naturally love our enemies well. And in fact, let me say this though. Even within the church, I don't think we do a great job with this. And I would even go as far as say that I think Southern Christians, like we're maybe particularly weak in this area. I remember hearing this story where there was an old-timer at this particular church. He wasn't old. He actually was pretty young, but he was an old-timer. You know what I'm saying? Like he'd been around for a very long time at this church. And he had a seat that he sat in every single Sunday. Anybody here, you have your seat at Essential, right? You got your, yeah, I see. It's okay. Actually, I know who's telling the truth, who's not. I see, I know where you're sitting. Kyle, I know you always sit right there, by the way. And anyway, so this old timer, again, a young guy, but an old timer, he's been in the church for a long time. He comes in, and he sees that a first-time guest family is sitting in his seat. You want to know how he responds? He calls Alexander Shinar on them. I'm just kidding, man. Obviously that never happened. But you know what? It does illustrate an important point. Even within the church, we do not do a great job loving our enemies. Anybody here familiar with the term, the idiom, a red herring? Yeah, I mean, we've heard red herring before. Can somebody, like, in just 2 or 3 words, what is a red herring? Okay, all right, good, excellent. All right, it's a distraction. But the definition of red herring is actually a little bit more nuanced than that. It's not just a distraction. A red herring is a distraction from something that's from something more important. Does that make sense? So it's not just like your run-of-the-mill distraction. It's something that's distracting you from something more important. In fact, this use of red herring as a figure of speech, we actually see the very first occurrence of it in the year 1805. This has been around a lot. And for the record, a red herring is just a herring that's been cured or salted. And in 1805, a journalist actually wrote about why he actually used red herring, and here's why. Apparently he got himself in some trouble, and so he was on the run. You know what I'm saying? Well, at that time, I don't know if this is still true, but at that time, hound dogs, like police dogs that can track a scent. Does that make sense? You follow me? Hound dogs that track a scent. They were trained using red herrings. And so that's how they were learned to follow a scent. So this journalist found out that he could just have like a big basket of red herrings, and he would just throw red herrings off the trail, and then he'd run the other direction, and the hound dogs could never find him. What I'm trying to say is, if you ever see me on Sunday morning with a red herring in my back pocket, it means I'm in trouble. You know what I'm saying? It means I'm running from something. But here's the thing. Here's why I bring this up about the red herring. I think when I say something along the lines of love your enemies, when we're reading these words of Jesus and we talk about loving your enemies, I think many of us fall for a red herring. I think many of us get distracted by something less important for us today. I'm not saying these things aren't important, but I think they're not the main question we should be asking right now. When discussing the idea of loving your enemies, I think many of us in this room right now, our mind goes to whether or not the death penalty is appropriate. When discussing the idea of loving your enemies, I think many of us, our mind goes to politics, or our mind goes to terrorists, or our mind goes to some sort of global dictator, or our mind goes to some sort of like really dramatic and rare story we read in the news. And those things are important, don't get me wrong. There is a place for discussion for those things. But I'm afraid that when we talk about love of enemies, we fall for a red herring and our mind goes to something when we should be going to something else. Turn to your neighbor and say, there's a more important issue. Say to somebody next to you, there's a more important issue, Kyle. There's a more important issue, Bill. There's a more important issue. And here's the more important issue. Here's the more important issue. Don't fall for the red herring. Here's the more important issue. When Jesus says, love your enemies, here's the question you need to be asking. How do you treat your real enemies today? When Jesus says, love your enemies, I shouldn't be thinking about something abstract or far off. I need to be saying, okay, how does Tim Milner treat his enemies today? That's the more important issue. And our distraction, it can look like a huge abstract societal problem while ignoring what matters today, right? Like we can start thinking about this abstract societal problem that seems really far off, and we can get into these very very intellectual arguments about what we should do about those enemies, and yet the problem is you're actually enemies with the person sitting right next to you right now. And if we're not careful, we'll put all of our thinking into how do we deal with that thing far off, and yet we ignore the people we're treating as our enemies that are sitting in this very room. That's a problem. That's a red herring. So today, I don't think Jesus' words are asking, how would you treat an ISIS fighter, some evil dictator from global politics? I think right now, Jesus is asking you, how do you treat that person who last week called you fat? How do you treat that person who you asked them to do something and they said no? I mean, I'm talking to us, like in real life, those of you who you feel like your coworkers are getting the better part of you, how do you treat those people? How do you treat that neighbor that might actually be taking advantage of you? How do you treat that person living in your home who's treating you like dirt? How do you treat that person who, when you texted them, because your 6-year-old has a hard time making friends and for the very first time said, hey, I'd like to hang out with that person outside of school, and so you text that kid's family, and say, hey, our kid would love to hang out with yours. Can we have a play date? And in the middle of the night, that parent texts you back and says, hey, we don't associate with your child or your family because all the parents in the school noticed except you, but your kid punched your kid punched a different kid in the face over a year ago at Jones Valley Elementary School, so no, we will not be hanging out with you. How do you deal with those kind of people? That just got real. When Jesus says love your enemies, how do you deal with your actual enemies? Let's keep it real. Few of us are getting into fistfights with our enemies. Your crime is not that you slap somebody. Your crime is your attitude. For many of us, our crimes are our attitude. The reality is, I don't think I've ever gotten into a physical altercation before. I don't. I mean, maybe when I was a kid, or maybe I shoved somebody, or somebody shoved me when I was like in middle school or something. But I really haven't. In fact, I'll say actually last year I got the closest I've ever been to getting into a physical altercation, and it happened at Taco Bell. True story. Excuse me. I was in the parking lot, and Kristen was very pregnant, and I was loading at that time 2 kids into our little SUV, and then somebody came up really behind me and asked for some money. And I said, man, I don't have any money. And he said, give me some money. I need money. I said, man, I don't have anything for you. And then he took his arm and he reached behind him like this. I was like, man, I've watched Dateline enough. I know what's about to happen. So I'm like, man, I bow up on him, right? I'm coming after him, and I took one Krav Maga free class, and so I'm about to give him my death, that thing. And thankfully, he ran off. Now, real quick about that, I do love Taco Bell. I do love Taco Bell, and I still go there, but now I just go with a friend. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of one of those places in my mind. But here's the thing. I never get into physical altercations, and my guess is you guys don't get into physical altercations either. The problem is our attitudes. Our attitudes determine our actions. Our attitudes determine our actions. If you think and dwell on it long enough, it's only a matter of time before you do that thing. Our attitudes, our mind, where our mind goes, it's a really big deal. In fact, let me share some really shocking words of Jesus Christ right now. Look at what Jesus says. Jesus says, but I say, if you are even angry with someone, you are subject to judgment. If you call someone an idiot, you are in danger of being brought before the court. And if you curse somebody, you are in danger of the fires of hell. Look what he says. If you're angry, if you call somebody an idiot, if you curse somebody, man, those are attitudes of the mind and the heart. Our thoughts lead to actions. And I want to ask you, when Jesus says love your enemies, I just want to ask you, what's your attitude towards your enemies? Let me share 2 very personal examples, and just full disclosure, these are very real, they're very raw, and I did get Kristen's permission to share these, and she said yes. Okay, Kristen gave me permission to share this. Let me share 2 examples about number 1. Sometimes, and this, I'm working on this. I really am working on this. I don't want to stay here. I want to get better. But when I come home from the office and the house is a disaster, I start getting really frustrated. I start getting really frustrated. And I'm not talking like a little bit mess, but like when it's really a mess, I get frustrated. And then when I see that like all of the lights are on in every single room, and like even when people aren't in that room, like man, I really start to feel my blood boil a little bit. I mean, honestly, I get so frustrated and worked up about that. And here's what happens. I start thinking, and I start dwelling. And at first I'm holding my tongue, right? I'm thinking, how can my wife let it get this bad? I just start thinking like, man, shouldn't you? What's the problem? Remember that one time I stayed home with the kids? The house was clean. You know what I'm saying? And I start dwelling on that. Yeah. One time. And I start dwelling on it, and I start getting angry. And honestly, and many times, like what happens is like Kristen, like it'll just kind of come to a head where like I'll walk into another room and there's just toys everywhere. And there's crayon and marker on that wall I just painted. And then Kristen walks in the room, and I blow up on her. I just start cutting her down with my words. What happened? I dwelled on something. And it started getting bigger and bigger up here, and by the second I was becoming more righteous and she was becoming more malicious. And then it just came to a head where I saw her walk into that room, and I just started cutting her down. The very one I am called, the very one I've committed before her, before a whole bunch of witnesses, and before God, that I would lay down my life for her, I began beating her up with my words. way, I am working on that. I talked to a counselor about it again on Friday. My guess is I'm not alone. But let me share another story. If I'm at the office and I'm thinking and I'm dwelling about how awesome my wife is. I'm thinking about what an amazing writer she is, what an amazing speaker. I'm thinking about how good she is to me, what an amazing parent she is. I'm thinking about how much she loves me. In fact, this is a true story. Every single time I call her, it's always the same. Every time I call her, she says, hey. She's so excited when she says that. And guys, it has been like that for the whole 10 years we're married. Every single time I call her, she answers, hey, unless I'm in trouble. But every time. And I'm thinking how beautiful she is, and I'm just dwelling on that during the day. And then we actually got a picture of what I look like when I walk in the doors after a long day at work. Show this picture. Right? Right? Like if I've just been dwelling on, oh man, how good she is to us. How beautiful she is. Man, I walk in there, man, I got those goo-goo eyes on. But what happened? In both of those scenarios, where I lost my cool and where I was madly in love with her, both times, it was the very same messy living room. It was the very same beautiful woman. Your attitude determines your actions. So when Jesus says, love your enemies, it's not, hey, have you gone around punching people? The better question is, what is your attitude towards your enemies? I only remember one thing from Psychology 101 at the University of Alabama. I only remember one thing. Now, let me say this. Somebody caught me in between services and said, he said, actually, all Bama people are the same thing. They only remember one thing when they come back from Alabama. So if that is you, you got some problems wherever you are. But I only remember one thing from this particular class, thank you very much, at the University of Alabama. And here it is. This is actually pretty serious. In fact, I think this is going to be helpful for you. Here's Psychology 101. When it's your problem, you blame your circumstances. When somebody else does something wrong, you blame their character. All right? Let me say that again. This is huge. When you do something wrong, you blame your circumstances. When somebody else does something wrong, you blame their character. Let me give you an example. Running late to a meeting. Let's say you have an 8:30 a.m. meeting, and you're a few minutes late. If you walk into that meeting late, here's what you probably do. You say, guys, I'm so sorry that traffic was worse than normal. I'm so sorry. My kids were crying right as I was walking out that door. I'm so sorry. I had a late night last night, and I had a hard time sleeping. I woke up a little bit late. I'm sorry. And we start blaming our circumstances when we have a problem. But all right, let's flip that position real quick. Let's say you're on time for that 8:30 meeting, and somebody else walks in late. Let me tell you where your mind most likely goes. That person is always late. That person doesn't value this meeting or this organization. That person doesn't have enough self-discipline to wake up on time so they can show up on time. And when the problem is ours, we blame something else. But when the problem is theirs, we blame them. I think so much of the division and anger and hatred we see right now is because when it's our problem, we blame our circumstances. But when it's somebody else's problem, we blame their character. But Jesus is about to show us a better way. Let's look at principle number 2. Jesus tells us why to love when it's difficult to do so. And it's because this is who God is. Let me say that again. Jesus tells us why to love. It's because this is who God is. There's a leadership principle, and it goes like this, that we need to constantly be revisiting why we do something. You need to tell yourself, like, why do you do the things you do? Wherever you work, why do you work there? And if you only work there because you need a paycheck or you think this is what all adults have to do, you probably hate your job. But if you love like the mission of your team or your organization, if you love the people, if you believe this is your calling or God's told you to do this, then you probably love it, flaws and all. And for all of us, we need to constantly be revisiting why do we do the things that we do. And here's the thing, even with the words of Jesus says love your enemies, but we need to ask ourselves why. Why do we need our love our enemies? Because if we're not revisiting this, here's the problem. Here's where I'm concerned will happen. You'll leave these doors, you will go love one person one time, and then you'll sink back into your old habits. There was no heart transformation. Out of just discipline, you tried to love somebody. But right now, I want us to look at why we're to love our enemies. And Jesus actually tells us, and I love this, and it's so shocking for many of us. I want you to look at this. We're actually going to pick up on our passage we left off this morning. Second half of verse 35. And man, this is shocking. I wish I would have given you all a multiple choice test and just asked you if the thing we're about to read is true or not. And I think many of us would have got it wrong. I think I might have got it wrong. Here it is. For God is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Let that soak in for a second. God is kind to the ungrateful. God is kind to the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. Why be merciful? Because your Father is merciful. Judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. Or in other words, as you give, you're going to receive more. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. This is absolutely fascinating. Here's the bottom line. You are to love your enemies because God loves his enemies, and you were created in the image of God. Bottom line today. You are to love your enemies because God loves his enemies, and you were created in the image of God. You were created in the image of a God who loves his enemies. That's why you should love your enemies. It's part of your character to love your enemies. It's part of your design to love your enemies. And we need to begin operating out of our character and our design. The reality is many of us operate out of our flesh, out of sin. Somebody slaps us, we slap them back. Somebody sends us a nasty text message, we send them a nasty text message back. Many of us, we are operating out of our flesh, out of our sin, out of our selfishness part of us. We need to begin operating out of that which was created in the image of God. We need to start operating out of our purpose and our design. And our motivations matter. We don't love our enemies to be loved by God. Rather, we love our enemies because we have been loved by God, because we are loved by God. We love our enemies because we were designed by God to love our enemies. We don't love our enemies hoping to find our purpose. We love our enemies because it is our purpose. We don't love our enemies because it's easy to do. We love our enemies because it's our design to do so. And here's the beauty of the gospel. I do believe every single one of us, if you're not already there, every single one of us will eventually come to the conclusion that it is better for you to love your enemy. I think we'll get into enough fights or enough arguments, or we'll eventually get sick and tired of our horrible attitude, and we'll eventually come to the conclusion that Jesus' way was better. And we'll eventually come to the conclusion that we are to love our enemies. And when that happens, many of us have already found this out, but if you haven't already, you're going to find this out. It's better to love your enemies, but you can't. You can't. To be more specific, you can't apart from Christ. On your own, you're not going to be able to carry this out. And I want to speak to a very specific group of folks today. If you're here and you're not a Jesus follower, you do not follow after Jesus, I wouldn't be surprised if your journey ends up looking like my journey. My story was not that I necessarily hit rock bottom and was doing a lot of bad things and got in a lot of trouble and just said, hey, there's got to be a better way, and then I found Jesus. That's not my story. My story is actually, I set out to be very, very good. With my father in the room, I can tell you I didn't break many rules growing up. Even from a young age, I desired to follow the rules. I saw that it is better to do good. But then I realized I couldn't. And the harder I tried to be good, the more I realized how bad I was. And for every single one of us, many of us, we will get to that place. We'll say, yep, I have a desire to love my enemies, but I cannot do this on my own. But I have hope for you. Because of what Jesus Christ has done for us, because of Jesus' finished work on that cross, we have been freed, we have been enabled to love our enemies. You can love your enemies because of what Jesus Christ has done for you. If you've not been doing a very good job with that, man, I want you to just be encouraged, because God is in the business of transforming lives. You have been freed to live out of your purpose and your design to love your enemies because we were created in the image of a God who loves his enemies. Romans 5:8 says, "But God shows his love for us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." While you were an enemy of the cross, Jesus went to the cross so that you can live out your purpose and design to do, among other things, to love your enemies as well. Anybody here, you want a better life? Anybody here, honestly, you want a better life? Then because of what Jesus has done for you, do for your enemy what you want done for you. Do you want more peace in your life? Feel like life's getting crazy? Life's out of control? Life's one problem after another? Do you want more peace in your life? Then show your enemies more peace. Man, do you realize that you've blown it, that you've messed some things up? Do you need more grace? Then show your enemies more grace. Man, do you realize you need forgiveness? Then show your enemies more forgiveness. This morning, I am asking you to follow something. But I'm not asking you to follow your heart. Man, I've done that and been burned enough. You gotta be careful about following your heart. I'm not asking you to follow your heart. I'm not asking you to follow your dreams. Sure, pursue them, but don't follow your dreams. Whatever you do, don't follow your gut. What I'm asking you to do is to follow Jesus. I'm asking you to follow Jesus. Maybe you feel like, this seems unnatural to you, to extend forgiveness and grace to your enemies. But if you're a Christ follower, it is Jesus' way. His ways are better. They are good. They bring life. Follow Jesus. If everything in your gut is saying, no, I'm just going to write this nasty text message back, don't do it. Don't follow your gut. Don't follow your heart. Don't follow your dreams. Follow Jesus. I do want to give you one practical, meaningful way to apply this today. It's the third Sunday of the month, so we are having Essential Growth Track number 3. Today is about developing your leadership, and it's really about finding your purpose and your design, the thing we're talking about. Now, it's from 12:15 to 1 o'clock, free lunch, free childcare. And today is all about a workshop. I'm going to give you a personality assessment that kind of helps you figure out how you're wired. And then there's also a spiritual gift survey. Now, really, hey, how has God gifted you? Are these tests and assessment, are they foolproof? Absolutely not. But I think they go a long way in helping us understand specifically, how has God purposed you? How has God designed you to do the work of the church? So I want to invite you to come be part of that. If you've already made plans and you just can't do it today, it's the third Sunday of every month. But don't put it off. If you can come today, come and join us. Meet me right over here at 12:15. 12:15, just a few minutes. My friends, Jesus said to love your enemies. Don't fall for the red herring. Don't fall for some abstract societal problem that's far away. I want you to be asking yourself today, this afternoon, how can you love your very real enemies today? Check your attitude. Check your attitude. Let's pray. God, we're so grateful for the way you love us. Thank you. Jesus, I'm so thankful that even while we were enemies of the cross, while we were enemies of your good ways, that you came for us. You lived a life we should have lived. You died the death that we deserved to die, and then you gave us the reward you alone could earn by your perfect life. Jesus, thank you. And I pray that each one of us, we would just follow in your steps of loving our enemies well. And right now, I'm going to start praying for a couple types of my friends. And if this describes you, I'm going to ask you to do something bold. I'm going to ask you between now and even starting right now, but even throughout this next song of worship, I'm going to ask you to do something bold. If I describe you, I'm going to ask you to come to the altar, to the stage, to the front of the stage. And you can stand here, or you can kneel here, or you can sit here, whatever you need to do. I'm just going to ask you to pray. I think something powerful happens when we give physical movement to our faith. And so if you're serious about these things I'm about to describe, I'm going to ask you to take a step of faith and come to the altar. The first group of friends I just want to pray for right now is if you're here and you want to begin a relationship with Jesus Christ. There is no reason you can't do that right now. You've not messed up too bad to begin a relationship with Jesus right now. If you're here and you want to recommit your life to Christ, I'm going to invite you to come to the altar as well and do business with God. And then a big group of people here, and I would assume this would be many of us. If you're here and you've really been blowing it when it comes to loving your enemies, and you just want to pray for God's favor and wisdom on how you can make this right, would you come to the stage and have one of us pray for you? As you come to the stage, I want you to do business with God. I want you to be praying. But then somebody from our prayer team, we're going to come up beside you and we're going to pray with you as well. And then a third group of people is this: anybody who needs God to do something in their life. If you're here and you need prayer for anything, I'm going to invite you to the altar. Maybe you've never come to the altar before. Maybe you've never asked somebody to pray for you before. I think today's a fine day to begin that. Why don't you come to the front? Let us know how we can pray for you. So for all of us, stand. Everybody go ahead and stand as we continue to worship this morning. And if you need to come to the altar, if you want to give your life to Jesus or recommit your life to Jesus, if you need help loving your enemies, or if you need prayer about anything, come to the altar right now.